Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
Every part of comics and artwork is a form of communication with other people. It's not just here, let me direct my thoughts at you as a dictation of concept, but it's hoping to convince you of how cool you think a visual could be or a story could be. And you're trying to communicate ideas in one part storytelling and greater part just graphic impact. You're hoping to relate a sense of energy, urgency, and enthusiasm to people. That there's a lightning of spirit that comes out of superheroes that has always worked for me. That it isn't really about the practicality of what they might do. It's not the practicality about grown men punching each other in costumes. It really isn't about that. It's a visual metaphor. And that metaphor could be for a lot of things, but it's mostly just about the energy and enthusiasm that can be found in the fun of life.
Ironside will not be seen tonight, so we may bring you the following special program.
Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntry is here. Happy to welcome Brion Salazar back to Word Balloon. Good to see you, man. How you been?
Good, John. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very sorry for the Ironside fans that are being preempted. They're not going to get to see that. That was terrific. Thanks for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy. Absolutely, man. Seriously, that has been like a little backdoor thing that I'm constantly looking for old TV shows, the specials that they would run on the networks, and looking for those kind of bumpers of, canon will not be seen.
Yeah.
Tonight.
Yeah.
So
Great
I
stuff.
got a couple of them. So
that just I got such a chuckle out of just that little thing right there. That was terrific.
Well, dude, I mean, Beyond Around Comics, which started just a year after Word Balloon. I mean, you're going to celebrate your 16th anniversary this year.
Well, on and off, we haven't been quite as steady as you've been for all this time, but yeah, we're back around comics. We've been doing it again for the last I don't know 3 years or so, and having fun with that. Me and Chris and Tom back doing it, but yeah, we have long history together. John, you were like the first podcaster that I think I ever met in person. I think I don't think I ever met a podcaster before you. You were the first.
Well, I understand, man. No, like I said, I just beat you by a year, but and I was telling you off the air, we just had little Augie on. Augie beats us both.
Yeah, that's right.
And Chris Marshall is another early adopter, as you know.
Love Chris. He's a good guy, good man.
But now you got a brand new project. It's funny. I was telling you about what I'm working on. I'll talk about it later on the show.
Yeah.
But you've got Real Crimes, and that's great. It's a combination of true crime and films based on true crimes. I listened to your episode about Rope, the Hitchcock film.
Oh,
based on Leopold and Loeb. Great job. Excellent.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yeah, I figured, comics podcasting, the landscape for comics podcasting wasn't quite competitive enough. So I wanted to go to the most competitive podcast landscape in the world.
Yeah.
True crime.
Nobody's doing true crime.
I'm breaking in early adopter. I'm ground level, John. That's me.
Yeah, but too, man. It's your point of view makes it different. So that's great. And why? All right. So, I mean, obviously, very popular subject, but from a personal standpoint, why true crime?
It was an interesting sort of development. It just kind of came about from a couple of different things. I mean, I've always been, if there's one thing I love as much as I do comics or more, it's movies. I've always, since I was a little kid, just loved movies, loved movie making, storytelling, and as I've gotten older, the craft of movie making, I just enjoy, sort of examining that and analyzing it and that kind of thing. But well, you had actually commented a while back. I don't know if you remember, I'd put out a episode on Around Comics, the Warren Ellis sort of, and it was almost sort of a joke to some degree. It was sort of like a examination of his behavior over the last year, kind of a Comic Book Confidential episode, and that kind of started the idea. Like you literally grew up in radio. You've been on radio for years and years and years, and I grew up with talk radio, and it just that led to podcasting from the beginning. But this particular thing, it was movies, and then I wouldn't call myself a true crime junkie, but when I was younger, I was really into true crime. I was a big horror movie fan, and then that kind of led to true crime stuff, serial killers, and I did a lot of sort of research or reading about serial killers and watching a lot of stuff when I was younger, but then I fell off of it and really didn't go back to it. Now it's just become so popular. But the idea was kind of came to me when I was doing a podcast with our friend Will Pfeiffer. We were, for Around Comics, we do a Patreon bonus thing where we talk about movies and TV, and then we started doing this Quentin Tarantino podcast once a month. We talk about a Quentin Tarantino film, me, Will, and Chris. And it just, every time I talk to Will about movies, I get more and more excited. And especially when we talk about Quentin Tarantino films, we just get really into it, and we can talk, at the drop of a hat about a Quentin Tarantino forever. And we started doing that, and it just got me really excited about talking about movies again. So I thought, well, what would be an interesting sort of movie podcast? If I want to do a movie podcast, what would be something that I could kind of do different? And so I thought, well, true crime would be something that's incredibly popular. And, it's obviously a very busy kind of genre of podcast, but, this is more just a love, of doing it. I just thought it was an interesting mix of things. And, how do you choose what movies to talk about? I mean, there's, literally thousands of films to talk about. So I just decided, well, let's talk about movies that are based on real events or true crimes or true events, that kind of thing, because it was a natural thing for me. Because whenever I watched a movie and I found out it was based on something real, I would start doing a deep dive on the real events because I wanted to compare. And I think that's kind of a natural thing for people to do. What are the real events compared to what the movie was? So I kind of thought that would be an interesting combination. And then I had to figure out how to do a podcast about it. And then that was a different kind of thing.
And again, you've got a rotating kind of people coming in to talk about the various films and crimes.
Well, and that was very much like necessity, because it takes me a couple of weeks to prepare for each movie. And I just thought, well, instead of trying to get one person to co-host it with me and rely on their schedule or try and force them into a schedule, it was a little easier to be like, okay, well, I can do this person this week, this person this week. And, we know so many people that we've talked to over the years and we like talking to. So I just thought, well, and then I had people that I'd never talked to on a podcast that were friends that I knew were interested in maybe doing it. And so, it just kind of came together that way. But it helps me produce the show because it's really research intensive. It takes a lot of time. So trying to, there's no way I can do it on a weekly basis. It's just too much between everything else I got going on.
You're like 5 episodes in so far?
Yeah, I have 5 main episodes, and then I have a couple of bonus episodes, smaller, shorter things that I talk about, sort of just something in relation to the other episodes. And I'm going to continue to try and do that.
Boy, I can think of a few movies I'd be interested if you would also be interested in doing. It's funny, like I said, I enjoyed your talk about Rope, and I see that you did Dog Day Afternoon.
Mm-hmm. Just did that. That was just recently released.
That's cool. And I mean, there really are. I mean, really going back to classic Hollywood, Rope, obviously from the 40s. Mm-hmm. God, I could think of another Chicago story called North Side 777. Is a Jimmy Stewart movie from the 40s that is based on a Chicago journalism coverage of a murder story and everything. So
I'm not familiar with that one. I see.
There you go.
That was the really interesting thing about this. When I first came up with the idea, I'm like, well, are there even enough movies, interesting movies to talk about? And then I started doing some research, and before I knew it, I had a list of about 300 films.
Sure.
And I was like, oh my God, I could do this forever. Like, this is,
Absolutely, man.
crazy. And they keep popping up. Like, I'm amazed at how many movies are based on or inspired by true events. And it's just like, and I've even done some that are a little silly almost, or kind of
Sure.
loosely tie into the
Sure.
podcast. But like, I have an episode, it's a double episode actually, because it was so much that'll be coming out soon on Tombstone. So it's not
Okay.
traditionally a true crime, but it's true events, it's history, and there are lots of crimes going on. So
no,
that
but
kind
it
of stuff.
is gunfight at the OK Corral. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I would say, although obviously people think more of modern police cases,
Right.
I'd make the argument that sure, why not?
Yeah, I kind of started to justify other things initially because I was like, well, it would be fun to do an episode on something that isn't necessarily factual, but maybe based on claims. Like, I want to do an episode on the Mothman prophecies because
Good.
it's not true crime in the typical sense. It's not even factual, but it is based on claims. It is based on people claiming to have experienced things, and there's plenty of real life sort of information about it. So yeah, I got a ton of movies, but I'm always looking for more. So, and I'd be happy to have you on as a guest if you want to talk about a
Oh
movie.
yeah.
If you have that would be terrific. So
Well, I mean, from the Untouchables to Boston Strangler. I mean,
yeah,
again, you know me, man. It's going to be probably shit pre 1980 that I'd want to talk about. The
sure.
Onion Field.
Oh,
Rachel
that's
Lava,
yeah. I
you know,
definitely have to do that one. Yeah.
so that's cool. No, absolutely. And if I didn't already say it, Boston Strangler from the late 60s, Tony Curtis and Rod Steiger. Yeah, again, I don't blame you for doing it. And I think that's a great subject to cover. And truly you can stretch things. I've been doing Thursday nights. We're not doing it this week because Gabe Hardman's in the middle of a move.
Oh.
He'll stay in LA, but he's kind of moving houses and stuff. But he and I, when we do Kinescope,
Mm-hmm.
Gabe's a stickler because technically it's live TV, and I'm so for that. But every now and then, I really had to like wrestle him on the Honeymooners, and he's like, "Well, the Classic 39, it was filmed," and I'm like, "It was filmed, but it was performed live, and they just had a better camera system. Even the Classic 39, they actually performed live, and so I'm like, I think that counts." And I said, plus the earlier episodes were Kinescope. So, he kind of relaxed a little bit. And then who else did it? Well, we did Betty White, and there was only one show that she did that was technically a Kinescope. It was called Life with Elizabeth.
Yeah.
A real happy husband and wife kind of comedy and stuff. But, she had just died. And I'm like, I mean, literally, as you likely know, and everyone kind of read in the obits, she was part of TV going back to like 1948 locally in LA. Come on, man. We got to cover Betty White.
Absolutely. Well, if Gabe is nothing if not a man of high standards, so I understand that for sure, and I appreciate it. But I can imagine it can be a little bit of a battle sometimes with that kind of stuff. Yeah, the Betty White. There's a great documentary on her I didn't know that much about Betty White, to be honest. I had no idea, but that show that was based on a radio show she did originally, wasn't it?
No, that was Lucille Ball, and My Favorite Husband. That was her thing.
That's okay.
So, and maybe I'm guessing that might be the confusion, because obviously, with that being the Ricardo's Amazon movie that's up for the awards. So, and plus, Ben Mankiewicz did a whole Lucy biography season on his TCM podcast, The Plot Thickens.
Love that podcast.
Oh, me too, man. Good Lord. And Lucy thing is so great,
I haven't gotten there yet, but I definitely will. I'm still on the
Bonfire the Vanities.
Yeah, no, Bogdanovich, Peter Bogdanovich.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And that was and I don't know. Do you listen to Katrina Longworth's "You Must Remember This" podcast?
I just started. What a great! I am so jealous of the name and the theme song for her podcast. It is so good.
I'm with you.
It's just such a perfect name for a nostalgic movie podcast, just
100%. And she really, as I'm sure, and in fact, your Warren Ellis example is in that same vein. To do a narrative podcast,
Mm-hmm.
just you and the facts, I think is very intriguing. And
Yeah.
she really does it well. And she narrates very well and she writes her stuff very well. So it's very engaging. And as I was telling you, off the air, I'm in the midst of my own little
Yeah.
project with We Got Something to Say, which is going to be about the monkeys. And that's coming along really well. And, again, I just, as I'm sure you feel, as again, going back as long as we've done it, let's try and do a few other things in the podcast world. And I think this is a good opportunity. So why not?
It's funny. I can remember sort of, 10, 12 years ago, whatever it might have been, 1 or 2 or 10 or 15 nights when we were podcasting together or talking together at a show. And just like thinking back then, as a man in my 30s or whatever it would have been, like how different I felt about comic books than I do today. And comics have changed so much, in a good way. I think they're much more for a younger generation, which I think is a terrific thing. But there's plenty. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of comics for guys like me and you. But I think I'm at that point in my life where I'm like, I'm kind of the old guy of talking about comics that aren't for me any longer. And it's like if I talk about a movie from 1948, it was before my time. I may not even have known about it or seen it or anything else. So I guess I can feel a little better about that perspective.
Well, but also, like younger people than us, I love those YouTubes of younger people discovering 60s and 70s music for the first time. And that's the vibe that I'm getting from your show. And that's great, man. No, it's always good to discover stuff and get a fresh impression. And like you say on your show, even, hey, maybe this will inspire you to watch the movie and regardless, think about it and stuff. So I think that's great.
The best I
was going to say, if you will, little Mike G wants to know, are there any limitations to what movies you'll cover?
No, I don't think so. I mean, as long as I find it to be somewhat interesting or, entertaining to talk about. And like I said, if it fits into some sort of real crime, some sort of true crime or true event, even if it's just inspired. The interesting thing has been when I did the first episode, which was Badlands, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know. I did all this research on the movie. I did all this research on the true events, the Charles Starkweather. Or no, that's not Charles Starkweather. Is it Charles? Yeah, that's Charles Starkweather murders.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know how it was going to fit together. And I just sat down with my friend Brad and I'm like, okay, man, well, let's just try this. I'm not sure if it's going to work or not because I haven't done it before. And I don't know, going back and forth between the film and the real events, how well this is going to work. And so we did it. And then at the end of it, I was like, okay, that seemed to work pretty well. And I was going to say that one of the best compliments I got, going back to what you were saying about turning people on to new movies, was I had my daughter who's 19 years old and has never seen Badlands, never even heard of the movie, doesn't know, Sissy Spacek or Martin Sheen or Terrence. Yeah. Doesn't know anything about any of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she listened to the podcast and she's a big true crime podcast fan. And she really enjoyed the podcast. And at the end of it, she said, I really wanted to watch the movie afterwards. And I was like, well, if I can get a 19-year-old to be interested in a movie from the 70s, then maybe I'm onto something. And that was a big part of wanting to do this too, because I felt like and I'll be honest, using the true crime thing is a gimmick to some degree. I'm not like a true crime expert. I don't have any background in, criminology or anything like that. And it was an idea of just like, well, it's very popular, but part of the goal was, hey, there's a ton of great movies that I'd like to explore and talk about and analyze and turn people on. And if this gets people interested in movies maybe they haven't seen before, then awesome. That's a huge bonus in doing the show.
I don't blame you, man. No, again, there are tons of great movies. And I mean, again, I don't know how ambitious you want to get. I wonder, and I honestly don't know the answer to this. If you could find a silent example of something that's based on a real crime, you know?
That'd be interesting. Well, I mean, I guess you could do like The Little General. I mean, it was based on Hitler, and but
Oh, you mean The Great Dictator?
The
Or,
Great Dictator. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right.
yeah,
The Great
Chaplin.
Dictator.
Well, even
Chaplin.
that, that's a sound movie, actually, 1940.
Oh, you're right. See, I don't even
So,
know. Yeah,
I mean,
geez.
and it's funny because you said Little General. At first, I thought Keaton, the General.
The General.
That's a Civil War story, but I wouldn't say it's really a crime
Right.
story per se. But yeah, well, there was the Great Train Robbery.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't even know, I mean, that's the famous Edison early silent and everything. And really, there may not be that much there. Hey, man, like I said, with Kinescope, we've done things that we thought, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. And in fact, our most recent episode, we looked at Yul Brynner.
Oh,
and we found a Playhouse 90 that he had done from 1949 that he directed.
Oh, wow.
And that's the interesting thing. Alongside his film acting career, he was a theater director in New York, a stage director. And when TV happened, he's like, these people don't know what the hell they're doing. And he just like kind of jumped in and became a big CBS director in the late 40s, early 50s. So we're like, oh my God. And there was this suspense story called The Storm. We watched it. It was the most boring 90 minutes. It was so bad. And seriously, it was me, Gabe, and Jeff Parker. And oh my God, we're just like, and Marsha Hunt starred in it. And Marsha Hunt was a great leading actress that was blacklisted for a period of her career and stuff, and managed to make a comeback in the 70s and 80s, and is still alive. She's like 104, which is insane.
Oh my God.
So, but we're like, oh my God, this is going to be great. And it was like watching paint dry for 90 minutes. It's just horrible.
Sometimes the story behind the story is better. I mean, that
100%.
I did the Amityville Horror, and not a great movie. It's not a great movie, but the story behind it is very interesting and able to pull a lot of stuff out of it. And it's based, originally on a true crime, and then a lot of kind of BS, about the house and that kind of thing. But it's a really interesting story in a true crime, from the murder that happened in the house, and then actually the sort of con job that happened with the book and the film, and the millions of dollars that was made off of that movie after, in the book especially. But it is interesting to, like, I've had these couple of experiences where Scream, I did the 1996 movie Scream, the original one, and I originally, when I started researching, I'm like, well, it's inspired by these murders that happened in Florida, the Gainesville. It was called the Gainesville Ripper, but the inspiration is very brief. It was Kevin Williamson had if you want to hear it, it's kind of an interesting story. But
yeah, it's actually, I was gonna say, like, direct people to the show, man.
So Kevin Williamson, the screenwriter, was house sitting for a friend of his. He was not familiar with the house, and he was there one night, and he realizes that there's a window open. And at the same time, he's watching TV, and on TV comes this Barbara Walters show, and they're talking about these murders that happened in Florida, in Gainesville. There was 5 or 6 college students that were brutally murdered by this guy, and it freaked him out a little bit, because he was like, well, is there other windows open? So he grabs a butcher knife and a phone, and he calls a friend of his just sort of as comfort. And he starts going around the house, checking, the other rooms, and he's a bit freaked out. And his friend, of course, being a typical guy, just starts messing with him and starts doing that and it ends up leading into them talking about horror movies. And that's where he came up with the opening scene from Scream, with what's her name? I can't think of the actress.
Drew Barrymore.
Yeah, Drew Barrymore on the phone in the beginning. And do you like scary movies? That all came from, so the rest of the film isn't really based on the Gainesville Ripper murders. It's just that opening scene is sort of inspired by it. But interestingly enough, as I went through it, I started to find these parallels between the film and the true crime. And it was really this interesting thing that there were a lot more things alike with the film. Obviously, there wasn't a guy running around in a Scream mask and in a cloak, but there were these parallels that are interesting that I was kind of like, at the end of that one, I was like, okay, I can do this with any movie. It does, you know what I mean? Like that was the one that sort of was like, I'll find something interesting to connect the two somehow. And so far, I think I've done that. But yeah,
there's a lot of good, really good TV movies that are made about true crime as well.
Yeah,
and the other interesting thing is, and I don't know how much you've investigated, like I said at the beginning of the show, the Iron Sight will not be seen tonight. There really are a lot of made-for-TV movies that are on YouTube for free. And hey, man, Mark Harmon did the Ted Bundy story. And, And I know Brian Dennehy. There's a ton of Gacy inspired films, both TV films and real films.
Yeah, there's at least 3 that I know of TV movies, I think. Gacy, and 2 or 3 Bundy movies that are done. I haven't gotten into those yet, but I definitely have some on the list.
Okay.
Yeah. It's sort of a matter of like, I mean, I didn't want to pick any of the real big names in serial killers right away, because I thought that was kind of, I don't know, everybody's talked about and everybody's talked about those murders and those events and the killers ad nauseum. You know what I mean? Like anyone that listens to true crime has heard about Ted Bundy or heard about, Gacy, or heard about, whoever. Yeah. So I kind of wanted to go a little bit more obscure initially. And then I did do Son of Sam, the Summer of Sam, the Spike Lee movie.
Absolutely.
Which was an interesting one for sure.
I met Michael Imperioli. Who I know was very involved in that film.
Yeah.
And we talked about that when I got to meet him. It was pretty cool. About Jesus Christ, more than 20 years ago now. It was when the second season of The Sopranos was debuting, and HBO invited a bunch of CBS radio people.
Oh, cool!
To New York for it, and from Chicago, it was Steve Dahl and his wife Janet, and Mike North and myself.
Oh,
so
nice.
we hung with we sung with the Dolls, and that was a blast. But then we got to meet the whole Soprano cast. And Imperioli, I'm like, hey man, nice going on Summer of Sam. He's like, oh thanks, I'm really proud of it, and it was fun talking about that.
He was supposed to star in it, or he was supposed to be the Richie, the character, but because of the Sopranos, there was a conflict, so he couldn't play that character. He was in it, but in a smaller role. And I guess he wrote the original screenplay. Yeah, I didn't know that at all until I started doing research about
the research. Sure. Yeah. Absolutely, man. No, that's, again, I don't blame you for doing it. I think it's a very rich, subject. And again, not just, feature films, but really quality TV movies have been made. Hell, even Peterson, the cop that killed his wife. Drew Peterson and everything. I think that's an interesting story that you should consider. And,
I won't discount anything. Like I said, when I first started doing it, I thought, I don't know if I'm going to have enough movies. And now I don't know if I'm going to live long enough to do all these movies because there's so many, even stuff like my niece and nephew who've been on a couple episodes with me already. They want to do I, Tonya, because they want to do Tanya Harding, I, Tonya. And I'm like, yeah, that's it fits in. It's not typical. I mean, it's not a serial killer. It's not, but it is a crime, that
absolutely is a crime, 100%. Yeah. Or, you could even do, with Manson, obviously Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but also Steve Railsback in Helter Skelter, which scared the shit out of me when I was a little kid. That TV movie. My God.
Oh, I've told this story so many times at this point, but when I was a kid, my parents took me to a drive-in to see Cannonball Run.
Okay.
And then the double
that was really scary.
But the double feature was Apocalypse Now.
Oh my God.
It took me about 20 years before I would watch that movie again, because it just it freaked me out.
Did it freak you out?
Oh, big time. I would not watch that movie until I was in my I think I was in my 30s before I actually watched Apocalypse Now, because it wasn't scary. It just, as a kid, it was just so dark and intense, and it just freaked me out.
See that now, my movie kind of like that, and I don't know if I've told you this story before. I've mentioned it on Word Balloon. Patton, the George
really?
Film.
Yeah, love them.
My sister was 10. My uncle and my father are like, let's go to the movies, and they were stuck babysitting, so we got dragged along. And my father was working at the restaurant, thought he was going to be able to meet us at a noon showing, and he couldn't get away from work, couldn't get away from the restaurant. So we sat through one showing, then sat through half of a second showing, and my uncle's finally like, I gotta go. And he had to take the kids. So we talked to the manager and is like, will you just keep an eye on the two? And again, like, would have been arrested today for
right.
like
Only in the 70s, right? Only
exactly. But nobody messed with us. It was fine.
right. You're fine.
And the ushers are like, you kids need anything? You okay? Whatever. I'm sure he gave them like, $10 or $20, like if they want drinks, or they want popcorn, take care of them or whatever. So we sat through a second showing. My father shows up in the last like 15 minutes of the second showing, and he's like, do you mind if we stay? I really want to see this movie. So we sat through 3 showings of Patton. It was in the summer. It was dark by the time we got out of the theater. And my sister and I kind of made a pact, 5 years old and 10 years old, let's never see this movie again. And it wasn't until the early 2000s that I broke the rule when I was at Sporting News Radio. And I'm like, it's supposed to be this classic movie, and it's Franklin Schaffner directed it. Coppola wrote it. George C. Scott won the Oscar for it. I'm like, I'm going to watch it. But it was like World War II, giant screen, all the bombastic, action and stuff. So no, I've been there.
I mean, you have, I mean, George C. Scott is phenomenal in the movie, but he's playing, Patton is just this so over the top character. And like, he's standing, I can just, standing in front of that giant American flag, in the beginning as a 10-year-old, a 5-year-old, like what are you even watching? You don't even understand it.
Completely over our heads.
Yeah.
We didn't know what the fuck we were watching. Absolutely, man. So no, I can understand. And Apocalypse Now, oh my God, some of the imagery and stuff is really scary. Jeez.
I think we ended up leaving pretty early into it. I think my mom was finally like, that's enough. Let's get out of here. So I didn't see the whole thing, but even still, it was just, I no joke. I think I was in my 30s before I watched it, because I'm just like, I don't know that it was sort of like there was another movie as an adult that I saw that it took me a while to watch again, which was Saving Private Ryan. And it was the knife scene where they're fighting hand to hand, and the Nazi just, drives the knife, slowly through the guy. That scene disturbed me so much for whatever, obvious reasons, but that it took me a while to ever watch that movie again. But yeah, movies are powerful, man. They are definitely powerful. They have a lot of effect, good or bad.
Honestly, man, and I know this is, we're all wondering this with the pandemic, and even as we crawl out of it, movies hit you a different way in the theater than they do at home.
Oh yeah.
And I really wonder, I was just listening to a great podcast that I love about movies called The Movies That Made Me. And it's the screenwriter Josh Olson and Joe Dante.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. Gabe Hartman turned me on to it.
I was just listening to the Guillermo del Toro.
That's a great episode. That's a great episode. But they just had, oh God, I can't remember his name now. He directed the Ipcris File with Bloody Michael Caine in the first Harry Palmer movie.
Okay.
And he did The Boys and Company C.
Oh,
Sidney Furie.
Is that his name?
I want to say Sidney Furie. But they were talking, and actually it was Dante who's like, seeing a movie in a theater, this great experience. And I wonder, and mentioning your 19-year-old, are they going to want to go back? I mean, actually, I do think kids will want to do it. Still will want to go to the theaters. And obviously the success of SpiderMan shows that, I think. And it was definitely geared towards a younger audience and everything. But, I mean, I won't deny, I really appreciate the comfort of my house and watching it on my big screens. And I've got a decent enough sound system. And I don't have to worry about some idiot with their phone,
right?
Or some of the yahoos that are in the city that, for whatever reasons feel compelled to talk to the screen or talk in a conversation. And there's just movie etiquette is so out of the, out of the norm anymore. Nobody, is polite about movies anymore. And it's like, you can pretty much see everything. And I don't need to see it first weekend out and everything. Some movies I can wait and stuff. And also the access to art house movies, because that was kind of my last reason to still go to the theaters for
Mhm.
a really long time and seek out little movies. And it's like, well, little movies are being covered by streaming and other ways of getting movies on demand and things like that. So I don't know. I wonder about the theater experience and what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up going to the theater. Going to the movies was a huge part of being a kid and growing
Yeah,
and in my entire life. And me and my kids have always gone to the movies, so I think they'll have that. But it is definitely getting harder to do. I mean, TVs are so much better and bigger and cheaper, and sound systems and the
yeah,
quality of everything. Like you said, it's there. I certainly, something like HBO Max, where they're releasing all those films, the same time they put them in the movie theaters. Like, wow, why am I going? You know, it's going to be really hard pressed for me to go to a theater and see comedies or
exactly.
certain types of films that aren't,
Yep.
and that's why like superhero movies are going to do well, because they're these giant blockbuster films that you want to see on the big screen. But the smaller films, I think, are going to have a harder time. And there's some really great movies being made today that, you look at like a studio like A24 and some of the phenomenal quality movies that they put out that probably aren't getting great, box office.
Right.
But man, it's a difficult thing for sure.
Well, we're in the midst of award season now, and and honestly, because I always feel ridiculous saying this, but the Television and Radio Union merged with the Screen Actors Guild, so
Hmm.
I've been a Screen Actors Guild member now for 5 years.
Oh, well, Mr. SAG.
I know, and truly, I get to vote on the
That's
SAG Awards,
terrific.
and Sal, they send me screeners. They're too far away to reach for, but I'd be happy to be like,
Yeah, yeah.
I literally got Belfast today,
Oh, wow.
and I'm excited for that. But also, they give you links to just watch them, through whatever laptop or whatever computer system you have, as well as hard DVDs, and it's great. And I mean, really, like Bendis and Kelly Sue and Fraction and people
Mhm.
like that, they're in the Writers Guild, so they get a ton more
Sure,
than
sure.
I get. And then the Directors Guild gets more than anybody else. But it's, I mean, really, it's been a blast getting these screeners. And yeah, again, a lot of them are these little art house movies that now again the streamers show them and stuff. And that's what I always ask the the filmmakers and the TV people that I've gotten to know, like Joe Henderson, who's the showrunner of Lucifer. And
Oh, okay.
I'm not worried about the Marvel movies and the
Right.
big spectacle movies. It's those mid-budget, like you said, comedies, romantic dramas, things like that. These little movies that usually are up for Oscar time, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, they had trouble getting. I mean, they were never. A lot of them were never going to be hundreds of
Huge.
millions of
Right,
dollar
right.
movie box office wise and stuff. But now even more so,
But
and it's really weird.
I wonder, and I have, zero inside knowledge on any of this kind of stuff, but I wonder if the fact that streaming, is so, mainstream at this point, that those kind of films actually have a better chance of being successful because of streaming, as opposed
Yes,
to if there were only theaters, they wouldn't have done well in the theater anyway. You know what I mean?
you're right.
Do they have an actual better chance at success through streaming platforms and secondary? Because I mean, I look at a movie like, I mean, it was pretty widely touted, but like The Green Knight, which was one of my favorite movies from last year. I don't know how that did in the box office, but hopefully it did extremely well, in streaming or secondary market, because it's an amazing movie. But yeah, would that have? I don't know if it would have been better or worse had there been, only theaters as opposed to both. I don't know. I don't know what the what do your guys say? What do they, kind of?
Well, I mean, it's a reality. Nobody knows, Sal.
Nobody
It's just
knows.
like
It's
podcasting, from the independent filmmaker to the guys that work at the studio and stuff. Nobody knows, and
yeah.
and I like that. I kind of like when there's that kind of disruption to the status quo, because that's when creativity kicks in, and also honestly, I think the awards are going to have to change and accept this, because what qualified as a movie was, well, it has to be at a theater, it has to be out at a certain
Right.
length of time. And even I know Netflix bought a couple movie theaters so that technically a lot of their films could be, considered. Manchester by the Sea was Best Picture a couple years ago. That was an Amazon produced movie that was available to stream as well as be in the theaters right away. And in subsequent years, and especially these last 5 years that I've been a SAG member, I've certainly noticed that there's the ease of watching a lot of them on the streamers along with the screeners that I get. Mm-hmm. So it's been very interesting to watch that evolution. And again, I just think, it's these mid-sized movies. It's the $50 million budget movies.
Yeah. Where
do they go? And I mean, the streamers are happy to produce them. So that's good news.
Well, I mean, going back to what we were talking about earlier with, something like the Beatles documentary. I mean, would something like that have gotten any kind of a release? I mean, that's a gigantic, whatever, however many parts that thing is.
Well, it started to be it was going to be a movie originally. And then as Jackson got into it, he's like, wait a minute, this is a much bigger story than I realized. Thankfully, with the ease and convenience of streaming, it turned into this, 3-part, 8-hour miniseries. And I'm glad, because honestly,
me too. I mean, that's what I mean. It's like, I'm glad that has an avenue where I got to see it in its full glory, that it, like something like that didn't have to rely on fitting into 2 hours or an hour and a half, where the studio, when it was only box office draw that mattered, there was a lot of creativity, I think, stifled to, or handcuffed, because it's like, well, it has to be this, it has to fit into this little square box. And, I don't know about you, but I'm sort of getting to the point where I'm so used to series and, watching a 10-part movie of hour long, that a 2-hour movie flies by now. And it's like, I want more of the story. If it's good, it's like, you can't give me too much of a good thing, or too much of a good story, at least.
No, I agree with you. I do think the miniseries has proven to be a better format for more in-depth stories. In fact, and again, I don't mean to name drop, but Mark Miller and I were talking years ago before his Netflix deal, and he's like, I like the fact that they're taking my stories and making movies. I'm like, yeah, but Mark, you got a miniseries, you got 10 hours. I'm like, you can really get into characters and individual moments. And, again, this is before the Netflix deal. And then now he's like, no, I'm a believer. He gets it now and everything. And he's thrilled that some of his, so much of his stuff is being made into in miniseries. Now I'm going to correct myself, because Psycho Cleveland's like, Manchester by the Sea was Best Picture. No, I was wrong. But Casey Affleck did win for Best Actor that year. So that, and again, that's my point, is that this non-studio movie, Amazon, did manage to get a lot of awards. It did win Best Picture for certain other pre-Oscar award things, but
Golden Globes and that. Yeah.
So, that's so funny. He's like, speaking of movies you see once and don't want to see again for a long time, and he goes, "Yeah, that movie was depressing as fuck." I'm with you, man.
Yeah,
and and truly, there's a lot of films like that where it's like, all right, never want. And again, like you mentioned, Apocalypse Now, but of course, other people do rewatch it and stuff. But no, I'm like that. There are certainly movies that I'm like Schindler's List. Really glad I saw it. Never want to see it again.
Yeah, I think I saw that once. I don't think I've ever watched it again. And I'm okay with that. Yeah, there's definitely those movies exist.
Yeah.
And they're great, but it's not necessarily, I mean, I don't want to be gut wrenched, like my heart torn out of my chest every month or something like that. Sometimes it's fine. It's funny though. I think about this sometimes, of like the dichotomy between, kid. Everybody talks about like, the Gen Z or whatever, millennials, sort of short attention spans and things like TikTok or 15-second videos, and they're getting trained. But then again, they'll watch 75 hours of a TV show no problem, and they'll binge watch it, a
Yeah.
series of hour-long episodes of something. So it's an interesting sort of paradox where it's like, yeah, on one hand, they want these short sort of dopamine drops, but then that doesn't seem to be affecting the ability of them to watch good long things. I, like I said, I'm trained to the point now where it's like, if it's only 3 episodes or 3 hours long, I feel shortened, if I've shorted me
Yep.
something.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
with you, man.
yeah,
No, I'm with
exactly.
you. It's funny, as I work on these other projects, I find it harder, and this is another difference between watching something at home versus going to the theater. I find it harder to justify anything that is longer than an hour of television. And I mean, some movies I can, thank God, with streaming, watch half of it, come back to it, and stuff like that.
Right.
But I mean, I am so busy making the stuff that I'm making. I'm like, I don't have the time. I can't justify it. I feel guilty if I tear myself away from my work long enough to sit for 2 hours. I'll confess, I still haven't seen Spider-Man because I've just been too busy.
I was going to ask you what did you, because like there's this this sort of we were talking about the Oscars, and people are talking about, oh, it should have been an Oscar nominee Best Picture, and I'm like, it was a really fun, nostalgic, great movie for what it was, but I don't know, maybe I don't know.
I get that argument in general, and especially when you consider decades earlier how many films were mainstream films that would get an Oscar recognition. Star Wars was up for Best Picture. I remember Bill Murray making fun of that on Weekend Update back in the SNL days. So and it was really fun, but it was, and I mean, so I do understand. And again, all the classics and stuff, Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, all these other films and stuff were award considered films.
Sure.
And especially last year, most of the Oscar films were so off the radar of mainstream viewers that they were, I mean, I even knew, again, getting my screeners, I'm like, if I didn't have the obligation of voting for them for SAG, I don't know if I would have watched these movies. And
it's definitely an odd thing sometimes where it's, whatever, however the Academy. I'm not a big fan of award shows, in general for the most part. I just like, whatever, do we really need to sort of prop these, stars up for more awards and more, ego kind of boost? But whatever. I get the fact that people want to sort of cheer for something, or they want to see the underdog win, or they want to see their film kind of do something well. And people, there's a lot of people that work incredibly hard on movies that we never know their names or we never see their faces. And I'm it's always great for them.
Well, and also, I mean, again, and I really love the fact that the Academy Awards have gotten more inclusive with international films, and it's not just the best foreign film. It's a global, movies are a global thing. We should recognize and acknowledge other countries' great films. And really, I mean, and especially not only winning Best Picture last year and stuff, but consider all the great South Korean horror films over the years. And then now people are kind of into that, and now that's opened a door for them. And so many other films like that as well. So I get it. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like, sometimes it's like the fact, though, that like Spider-Man isn't up for special effects or sound,
right,
the kind of categories that a lot of the tentpole movies normally do, get recognized for. That is interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of odd. I think for me, with that argument, the Spider-Man argument, and it's hard to separate the two, because it's like, well, I'm such a comic book fan. I mean, seeing that, what they did with that movie emotionally, it was such a hit for me because of, decade of watching Spider-Mans, and I meant that in the plural sense. The Spider, and so, but it's sort of like, I don't know, is it emotionally cheating to some degree? It's like, well, we're going to take 10 years of movies and call back to them but it's done in such a great way. I thought a little bit about the same thing with like Endgame and Civil War, or not Civil War, but Endgame and Infinity War, where it was like, I loved those movies so much because it was this culmination. you
Yeah.
know, and it was a buildup of the decade of films and stories and characters and all these things that I love, finally seeing it come on screen, you know. But it's like, well, can I compare that to one film that doesn't have anything come before it, that isn't built on 60 years of comic books and
Sure.
stories, you know, that, you know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it seems a little like cheating almost.
Well, they're two different. As Hickman always said about comics, there are two books that are on the shelf for very different reasons, and you
Yeah.
can say that about Marvel movies and mainstream movies. I do get annoyed by the nose in the air attitude of a lot of the old school Hollywood people,
Hmm.
and it's like, sorry, but I would say, like, good news, we're still paying attention to you, Scorsese and Coppola. When you make something new, you might have to shift platforms. Again, like you pointed out, millions are still watching.
Yeah.
So what's the problem would be my answer. And again, I get it. They are shooting these things for the intent of them being shown on a big screen. I mean, I loved The Irishman. I loved that
Yeah.
it was as long as it was.
Me too.
And I think, again, just showing that Scorsese still got it. And it surprised me that it didn't do better in award season than it did.
Mm-hmm.
But what are you going to do? I mean, it's.
Yeah, I think, well, it's kind of ironic with someone like Scorsese, especially because he was part of a revolution in film, from going from old Hollywood to new Hollywood,
Yeah.
and shaking things up and changing Hollywood so much.
Right.
And I think, I don't know, I think that whole thing was a little overblown, though, sort of people, almost looking at him as an example of the old Hollywood who isn't willing to accept this change with superhero movies. And it's like, what do you expect the guy? What do you expect this man that has spent his entire life dedicated to a specific sort of art form, and now he's seeing the end maybe of that, not the end, but he's seeing
a transition.
A shift. Yeah,
a shift, absolutely. Yeah, but Sal, he grew up in the era of westerns. And I've been making this point for really since almost 10 years ago, when 2013 looked like it was going to be the oversaturation of superhero movies. Because that's when Wolverine came out, and one of the Garfield Spider-Mans, I believe, if I'm getting my timeline right, but Scott Pilgrim was out that year, and they didn't do as well as people expected. And everyone's like,
this
maybe
is the end.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe we're at the oversaturation point. And I remember talking to Danny Fingeroff, the old Spider-Man writer and editor, about it. And I'm like, well, look at the Western. And I go, I think superheroes are like the way the Westerns were from the 30s, really up till the early 70s, where people kept finding different movies to make within the genre.
Right.
You'd get comedies, and you'd get heist movies, and you'd get intense psychological profiles. And I go, I think superhero movies are finding that same footing, and things will settle down. Things will calm down. But obviously, again, look at the success of Marvel, all the other studios trying to be like Marvel.
Sure.
DC finally getting kind of its shit together. Thank God, with James Gunn. And I think, Aquaman, the first Aquaman movie, the first Wonder Woman movie, not so much Wonder Woman 88. But yeah, I do think that there's room. And also, too, again, we're getting better TV. The Marvel TV has been great. God, Peacemaker has been, Peacekeeper has been incredible. Peacemaker.
It's maybe my favorite comic book related thing of all time.
Peacemaker.
It just hits all the notes for me. I mean, growing up in the 80s and hair metal and all that, and
Sure.
John Cena is just the perfect douche of a superhero. And yeah, it's so I agree with you, though. I think, funny enough, in the opening of your podcast, the Alex Ross video, I think he puts it eloquently. He talked about, it isn't about guys and girls in costumes punching one another. It's this analogy for other things. It's the excitement and energy of, sort of youth, and of, a different kind of power. It's not just about these guys and girls in costumes. It can be anything. They're just a metaphor. you know. And I think
It's
a
a
lot of
framework.
yeah. I just think a lot of people don't quite. We've known that forever, you know, being comic book fans, growing up and reading comics and studying them and talking about them. We've realized that, but I think a lot of people just still, like you said, just sort of snub their nose at it because they look at it as one certain thing. Well, if it was just one thing, if it was really just one note of a thing, it wouldn't be around for 80 years now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Superman wouldn't exist still, Batman wouldn't exist still. There's obviously something deeper than just people in costumes punching one another.
Well, but here, like Psycho Cleveland says, why would these people expect Scorsese to view superhero movies as anything but what he said about them? Might as well have asked what he thought of the Die Hard movies or Terminator.
Yeah.
People have so much emotion tied in these movies. But again, and I guess what I didn't say about Westerns was I would think as a student of film, as Scorsese is, that he would see that this is like the way that the Western was so dominant in theaters alongside the big movies. And I guess the difference now is, again, the Westerns, I mean, they may have outperformed in certain markets the big classic Bogart movies or Jimmy Stewart movies because they were cheaper to make. So they probably made more money and they were all over the place and everything, Saturday matinees and all that crap. But now it is kind of moving them to the side where, like you said, Sal, I mean, it's, maybe people are like, I'm not going to go to the theater to see Nightmare Alley. You mentioned Del Toro.
Yeah.
Or even West Side Story. That's Spielberg. They may not want to see it on, I mean, they should, but maybe they won't see it there. Maybe they'll end up seeing it on a streamer or whatever. And that's the difference now. And they kind of resent that. And like I said, I get it. I understand. But I also think that you would, a student of film like Scorsese might recognize, okay, we're in the midst of, this is where Westerns were in the 40s and 50s.
I doubt that he's ever watched any superhero movies. And so it's like you're asking a guy that's probably never even seen them. All he's seen is, you have these super popular films that are pushing out smaller movies. They're the summer blockbusters. He probably would say the same thing about Star Wars at the time when Star Wars, you know what I mean? Like, even though,
I don't know, man, because, and again, you're reading Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. I know that Lucas showed Star Wars to the, the new Hollywood group, John Milius and I'm assuming Scorsese and Spielberg and guys like that. So, I don't know. I suspect. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know if he has. I don't know if
maybe not the first one, but maybe like Empire or Jade. I don't know. Return of the Jedi. He might have thought at that point. You know what I mean? But I'm just saying, like, I don't know that it was a fair sort of way to tell a story about a guy that you ask a question. It's sort of a loaded question. You know what I mean? And to expect Scorsese to be I don't know, aware enough of those movies or care enough to give a different answer. I don't know. Who cares? I mean, what difference does it make? I love Scorsese. I don't need Scorsese to love superhero movies.
No. And also he still has that platform. It might be a different platform, but clearly based on like The Irishman, I would say the same thing about Coppola, that they're going to get funding. Sidney Fury, who was on that Movies That Made Us podcast, man, when you can't wait if you get a chance to listen to that episode.
Yeah, I will.
He's 88 and still making movies.
Good for him.
And he even said, I'm making him on a shoestring. I'm telling very personal stories that I want to tell. It blew my mind. And I'm like, hey, man. Hey, I'm 57. I know I'm a little older than you. So 60 is staring me down. But I am not afraid. And also it's like, no, I still have ambitions. And it's so great to see a guy in his 80s still have ambitions to say, oh, no, I'm prepping a movie. Well, first of all, that's what keeps us alert and lucid, is having a reason to get up in the morning. And, oh, my God, truly, these guys are right. I mean, it's like like I said, I'm just so glad they're thinking that way. And if I were Scorsese, I would hopefully be doing the same thing. Of fine, they've changed the rules of the game. Okay, fine, I'll adapt, and I'll be fine because I'll still tell my stories.
Yeah, I think to me, it's just somebody who's if you're Martin Scorsese, these superhero movies are probably just a pain in the ass. You know what I mean? Like he's already at a point in his career probably where it's a little more difficult for him to do what he wants to do. I don't know. I'm obviously just guessing, but I'm thinking, just looking at sort of the history of Hollywood, it's a quick descent. You know what I mean? For a filmmaker trying to get funds for a film, it starts to be a very quick descent, and you make one film that doesn't perform and the next one's that much harder to get funded. And now he's got these, it's like, well, if you're not making a blockbuster, if you're not making a giant CGI filled superhero movie, we're not that interested. And the doors are closing, and he's staring at the end of a career, maybe going, what the hell? Now I got to deal with this shit. I got to, you know what I mean? So to me, that's all. It's just like, yeah, I kind of understand. I kind of get it to some degree.
All I know is Woody Allen, and especially with the amount of cancel culture that he is facing these days, is still putting out movies. He's got, I think it's called Rifkin's Revenge. I think it's some sort of alliteration, but it's Wallace Shawn and a great cast of serious actors. And, he may not find funding in the States, given the cancel culture status that he currently has. The international audience still very much wants Woody Allen movies, and I would suspect would still want Coppola movies, would still want Scorsese movies. So,
man, after that miniseries on him, I'm surprised he gets his head out of the dark. It's like, my God, the thing was brutal. That was
I agree.
But
yeah, no, quite an indictment. I understand.
Yeah.
It's a curious thing. Do you have time? I wanted to ask you a couple comic book questions.
Sure, absolutely.
All right. What do you think of Substack and all that stuff that's going on with Substack?
I find it interesting. I think that it seemed like it had a huge kickoff. I think they did a tremendous job of getting people sort of turned on to it. I haven't talked to anyone so far about, you've probably talked to more people about it than I have, as far as, their level of success with it. I have one technically for Around Comics. I have one technically for Real Crimes, but I don't have any time to do it. So, you know what I mean? So between trying to research for podcasts and do everything else, I just, haven't really had the time to dedicate to putting enough information on it. But I follow a bunch of the comic book people on it, and they're putting out content, pretty regularly. And, if it's another revenue stream for them, all the power. Personally, I find it a little bit of a clunky thing in some ways. It feels like they're trying to do a little too much with it, or offer a little too much between, sort of premium pay, premium subscriptions and podcasting. But at the end of the day, if you're offering stuff to people and you have an easy way to make a buck on it, then more power to you,
Well, it's great. It's free grant money, and all Substack is asking for is the process and behind the scenes stuff, generating a newsletter, generating video and audio, and getting people to the Substack platform. And you probably know, Substack started really with a lot of journalists who found themselves without newspapers anymore. So it was, hey, all right, you can continue to write articles, but you will do them as a newsletter and take your audience with you. And in a lot of ways, it reminds me of the ease of going to Image and other publishers in terms of taking my DC or Marvel audience with me. And James Tynion right now is a great example. Scott Snyder, a lot of his stuff that he's doing, a lot of his creator-owned stuff, he made a deal with Comixology, but he also did make a Substack deal, and he's using Substack to teach people writing, which I find interesting.
Yeah.
And of course, now the first wave, like you said, made a big splash. The second wave really got started this year, and you got Tom King, and you got Ilsa Chartier, you have Kari Randolph, Grant Morrison was announced now. Bendis, I know, is doing something with his Substack, and again, I think it's more on the writing process, but maybe he'll eventually be putting out a creator-owned book as well. And also I know it's for the one percenters as far as the creators that are being offered this shot.
Right.
But
they're bringing an audience to Substack. That's
exactly,
it's like anything else. I think trying to use it to break through, or trying to use it to build an audience is going to be more difficult than the people that are already bringing their audience to it, and they're getting those deals. So I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting concept for sure. And hey, anything that these guys can do to create and control their own brand, more power to them for sure, because for too long they didn't have that ability.
100%.
So it's like I said, for me, I don't have the time to invest in like sort of paying for blogs and that kind of stuff for the most part, unless it's something I really, I mean, that's the issue. Like, where's the cutoff? Where's the line? Because there's so much content in the world. I don't have the time, even if it's some creator that I loved and I love what they're doing. I don't have the time to follow it anyway. So I'm not, you know what I mean? So that's where kind of, I don't know. So I don't know how successful they've been with it. I don't, other than the grant money, but when is that going to play out? When is it going to, is there going to be a tipping point where it's like, well, you're not getting enough people to sign up for the premium subscription, and we don't want to continue funding this, you know what I mean? So I don't know what's the long game on it for both sides.
I haven't talked to, and I haven't talked to anyone from Substack, and I don't know what their end game is, because I do think that again, they're hitting the right people that do have thousands of fans and are smart in terms of the premium product that they're offering isn't more than $8 to $10 a month.
Yeah.
And you'd be paying that anyway if you went right to the newsstands and were buying creator-owned stuff. And also, ultimately, a lot of these books through Substack, the Substack subscribers are only getting them 6 months earlier than what we will see in the direct market. And that I mean, everybody I've talked to is like, oh no, with it,
right,
scenario a year,
at some point.
Yeah, that they'll be available. The other guy, and I know you're a huge fan of his, and I love since the pandemic. I mean, what Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips and everybody that Ed works with have accomplished during the pandemic, and putting out incredible books.
Oh yeah,
and man, I'll tell you, because for the longest time, I mean, it was years before I was talking to Ed regularly when he was working really hard on TV. And all of a sudden he's like, hey man, I got, a pulp. And he told me about Reckless. And I'm like, and he's like, can I come on? I'm like, Ed, I've only been bugging you like every 6 months for the last 6 years. Of course you can come back. And he's like, yeah, I'm sorry. I've been really busy. I'm like, no, it's fine. I go, as I would tell every one of my people I'm friendly with, it's like, if it's talking to me or making the donuts,
right?
Make the donuts, please make the donuts. Rucka has really been busy, and I'm like, Greg, I still consider you a friend, but if you're too busy to talk to me, it's okay. I don't want to bother you. I want you to make things. We want to read this stuff. I can wait. It's fine.
I mean, there was a since we came back with Around Comics, we sort of ran into this wall of like, between the amount of comic book podcasts that are out there, the amount of work that creators are doing, and the amount of creators that have their own podcasts or have their own avenues to get the information out, we just got to the point where it's like, we don't really hunt down people to have on the show anymore. You know what I mean? It's just, as much as I think people love podcasts for it, when they have big creators on, it was just like, there's enough sort of people doing that. Let's, I mean, for us, we're just doing it for ourselves more than anything at this point. But it just got to the point where it's like, well, we're going to try and get somebody on that is either has already been on 7 podcasts this month or has their own podcast. Like, why do they want to come on our podcast to talk about comics when they have their own? And it's probably, they already have an audience probably bigger than ours.
Well, but also the good thing it was and is that you guys always had a chemistry amongst yourselves, Chris, Tom, and yourself. So that's fine. And I mean, that's the thing. And, I got into this to do interviews. And luckily, having stuck around, people still find value in coming on Word Balloon regardless. And,
well, but you offer so much more in those interviews and in your relationships with all those people, as opposed to the 50, 60, 70 other podcasts that have come along since we started this, or 200 podcasts.
I was going to say 50 or 60.
Yeah. 200,
Chris,
300.
I remember having a conversation with Chris in 2009 or 2010, and he's like, do you realize there are more comic book podcasts than movie critique podcasts? And I'm like, yeah, I've seen the numbers, man. Yeah, and they keep coming.
I was laughing to myself the other day because as I was sort of going through the landscape of podcasts, I started to realize there are an incredible amount of podcasts out there that are now basically talking about other podcasts. Like, that has become a thing now. There's so many podcasts that there are podcasts about podcasts to listen to. And I'm like, I think that's maybe my next business model is I'm going to start a Substack curating the Substacks that you should subscribe to, because there's just so much content being put out, but yeah, I don't know how many there's podcasts just talking about other podcasts. It's just that blows my mind, but wow. I get it. It's
again, I mean, and the directions that we're stretching in, you with Real Crimes and me with my Monkeys documentary and stuff. I'm really excited about, beyond just doing talking head interviews, the potential of other things to use the podcast platform in different ways. And I'm very excited about that. And I'm in a good rhythm with Word Balloon that I'm like, all right, I do want to invest time on doing other things and stuff. And again, I congratulate you for Real Crimes.
Thank you.
Absolutely, man. No, this is great. And really, yeah. So, I mean, I can think of a handful of movies. So if you're
absolutely, man. If you
for a guest sometime, I'm happy to jump on.
For sure, John. I would love to have you on. Think of something you want to talk about. Think about a movie you really want to do with it, but something that maybe you
more obscure.
Well, or that you just don't know the true crime stuff about. Maybe.
Okay.
You know the movie, but maybe you don't know the history of it, or it's based on something, but you don't know like the details. Just so we.
Well, I'll tell you, I think the Boston Strangler, because that's a movie that and again, being as old as I am and everything, and man, I'm sure you have movies like this too. I remember seeing it years and years ago in the early VCR days of the 80s or whatever, but I'm sure it's been 30, if not even longer, years since I've sat down and watched it. And it's a great movie with Tony Curtis and Rod Steiger, kind of in their primes in the 60s. And again, based on a true story. So it's like, oh, that'd be something interesting that I'd be intrigued to watch.
All right.
68 film.
I got your name on Boston. I don't know that I've ever seen it, to be honest. I don't know that I've. So,
and I can guarantee you, like quality movie. So
no.
maybe not Goodfellas, but certainly a great movie.
You can't go wrong with Steiger and Tony Curtis. I mean, come on,
exactly.
Yeah, phenomenal. No, I'm excited for the Monkeys.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, no, seriously. I grew up with the Monkeys, and as we talked about, I had the chance to meet Mickey Dolenz once, and it was a thrill for me, in my probably early 40s when I met him, and because growing up with that show, and yeah, man. So I'm looking forward to that for sure.
That's cool. And by the way, Psycho Cleveland, good suggestion. Yes, the Fritz Lang movie with Peter Lorre is based on a true story, and that would be another one I would love to talk about. And I don't know the full details of that original crime. And that's a classic. My guy, Fritz Lang, good Lord.
Yeah. Now that's not silent, right? It's
I want to say late 30s.
I was gonna say, is that like 37, 38, something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah.
And Lang was like Billy Wilder. Lang was one of those German directors that was making films at UFA. That's the big German movie studio.
Oh, right.
And then when Hitler came to power, a handful of creatives are like, yeah, maybe it's time to leave.
See, this is what's going to scare me though about doing the podcast with you, because you're going to probably already have in your brain more information than I can look up about these movies. But that's okay. That's all right. It'll be great. For sure, man. It'll be fun. And yeah, I hope people check it out. It's I'm 6 episodes in, so I'm still sort of finding my feet a little bit with it. I think it's getting better every episode. I'm having, one of the difficult things with it was I want to always be very respectful about the real crimes and the people that were murdered and killed in these events, and I never wanted to treat it like a joke or be too comedic about it or try and be funny. I want to be entertaining, but at the same time, it's like I never want to lose perspective that these are real people. Like, these are real, true crimes, and people died, and they're most of the time very horrific. So it's a little difficult sometimes to sort of, not play it too straight, but also be respectful at the same time. But I'm finding my feet as I go along. So I hope people check it out. It's if I can plug the website, it's realcrimespod.com. It's real with 2 E's. So real, like film reel.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere. It's on, Spotify and iTunes and all those places. So
no, that's great. That's excellent, man. And again, so realcrimes.com or
realcrimespod.com.
Very good.
Yeah.
Smart. Very good. No, excellent. And then Cleveland corrected me. It's from 1931, but obviously not a silent.
Oh, okay.
And no, that's so regarding Fritz Lang and M and everything. Hey, man, congrats. I don't blame you for doing it. I'm glad you're stretching. And, continued success with that and around comics. Say hi to the boys.
I will do that. Thank you so much, John, for having me on. It's always, it's been great just being your friend and doing this thing together and all these years. It's like we were, in the trenches, and it's so many good memories over the years of hanging out on Friday nights at comic shops and at conventions and all that stuff. So
100%, Sal. Absolutely, man. And truly, never competition. Always we're in this together. Things are different enough that there's plenty of room for all of us to have fun doing podcasting and stuff. And truly, I feel the same way getting to know you over these years. I can't believe it's been as long as it has. And I'm glad you've, even come back and been on Word Balloon as much as you have and stuff. We talked when DC left Diamond.
Yeah.
Like that had and stuff. That was the last time you were on. So thanks for doing stuff like that.
I was going to mention, there was a part of our conversation tonight. We were talking about some smaller films or art house films, and you had actually asked me to be part of the online comic book convention. I can't.
Oh yeah. One of the Mainframe shows that we did.
Mainframe, and I talked to Al Ewing during that, and then I actually had Al on later on and talked to him. And we barely talked about comics, but he turned me, he got me onto Russ Meyer films, because he's like big into Russ Meyer films.
Hilarious.
Lately. And so I'm like, I haven't watched, I think I've maybe seen 1 or 2 of his films. And then, so now I went on this sort of kick of watching Russ Meyer films, thanks to Al Ewing. So
hilarious. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's very funny. I'll tell you off the air, at the beginning of the pandemic, Gabe Hardman's like, I'm looking for a good Outer Limits podcast. I can't find any. And I'm like, you want to do one? And he goes, yeah. So we did, and it was great because there were only 49 episodes of the original series. We acknowledged the Canadian remake of the 90s because there were a handful of really good episodes, but I would, stress handful. So we didn't get much into that. And then when we were done with that, he's like, "What do you want to do next?" And I'm like, "You're a podcaster now."
He's
So we started doing Kinescope, and we already have the next subject that we want to do, and I'll tell you about it off the air.
Oh, nice.
But, yeah, and it's funny. It's not quite Russ Meyer, but yeah, I'll like think exploitation films, and we'll leave it at that. And
all right,
when it's
awesome.
time to announce, we will. But yeah,
Great. Looking forward to it.
well, thanks for the hang tonight, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Mhm.
Great questions and listening as well. And until next time, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.